My name is Abigail Stewart, and I grew up in a world defined by privilege. Born into wealth, I never realized the extent of my fortune as a child. To me, it was simply how life was. My family owned Stewart Pharmaceuticals, the largest pharmacy chain in the state. It wasn't just a business. It was my grandfather's legacy, built from the ground up. When my father, David, inherited it while I was still young, the company became his entire identity. Every evening, he'd return to our grand Victorian home, loosening his designer tie before diving into discussions about profit margins, often without even a greeting. Another record quarter, he'd announce at the dinner table, where my mother, Margaret, would nod approvingly while adjusting her pearl necklace. This is what I will pass down to my children someday. My older brother, James, would sit quietly, pushing his food around his plate. At just 12, while I was still preoccupied with dolls, he was far more interested in ancient civilizations than in the family business. Whenever he attempted to steer the conversation toward his latest archaeological discovery in our backyard, Dad would dismiss it with a wave. I was different. Even as a child, I found joy in helping out at the pharmacies. By the time I was 14, I knew our regular customers by name and could recite our entire inventory as easily as the alphabet. "Now that's my girl," Dad would say proudly when I assisted an elderly customer in finding the right medication or suggested a new display arrangement that boosted sales. "She's got business in her blood." As James delved deeper into his history books, Dad began bringing me along to business meetings. By 16, I was taking inventory and learning basic accounting. "Watch and learn, Abigail," he'd say, showing me how to review contracts. "This will all be yours one day." My mother was thrilled, too. Finally, someone to properly carry on the family tradition. She gifted me expensive business suits for my birthday while James received budget history books. I vividly remember the night James announced his intention to study archaeology in college during dinner in our formal dining room, adorned with a crystal chandelier worth more than most cars. "What?" Dad erupted, his fork clattering against the fine china. "No son of mine is going to waste his life digging in the dirt." "David, please," Mom interjected, her face betraying her agreement with him. "It's what I love, Dad," James replied quietly but firmly. "I've already been accepted into the program. Professor Anderson believes I have real potential." "Potential to be poor," Dad shouted. "We're business people, not dirt scholars." I watched as James' face set in a determined expression I recognized all too well. His mind was made up. "Then I guess I'm not a business person," he said, standing up from the table. That moment shifted everything. Dad's focus and expectations turned solely to me. I was no longer just a backup plan. I was the future of Stewart Pharmaceuticals. The pressure was immense, but I relished it, or so I thought. Preston Business College was everything I had dreamed of. Prestigious, competitive, and filled with other trust fund kids like me. I felt right at home with my designer wardrobe and platinum credit card. That's where I met Zane, in the campus library. I was struggling with a coding assignment when he noticed me muttering curses at my laptop. "Need some help?" he asked, sliding into the chair next to me. His kind brown eyes sparkled, and there was a slight accent in his voice I couldn't place. Thus began our connection. Zane was brilliant. He'd earned a full scholarship for computer science and consistently ranked at the top of his class. Professors often used his projects as models, and fellow students scrambled to include him in their group assignments. Yet, despite his achievements, he remained humble. It took me 3 coffee-fueled study sessions to gather the courage to inquire about his background. He spoke casually about his parents immigrating from Syria when he was a child, his father working in security, and his mother cleaning houses. He shared how he had taught himself to code on a second-hand laptop since he was 12, doing freelance work after school to help pay the bills. I had never worried about bills in my life, but the way he spoke, without a hint of self-pity, only deepened my admiration for him. A month later, we were dating. Zane was unlike the wealthy boys I had grown up with. He opened doors out of genuine politeness rather than as a result of etiquette classes. When we went out, it was to small family-owned restaurants where the food was incredible and the owners knew him by name. 6 months in, he proposed, not with a flashy diamond as my father would have expected, but with a simple silver band he had saved up for, given to me during a sunset stroll through campus. It was perfect. When I shared the news with my father, he initially planned a grand family dinner to introduce my fiancé, inviting all our relatives, envisioning an heir to a Fortune 500 company. However, as we entered our expansive dining room, the atmosphere shifted. My family's eager smiles morphed into barely concealed sneers. My Aunt Patricia actually clutched her pearls, and my mother's champagne glass froze midair. The silence was deafening until Dad finally cleared his throat, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the room. "So, young man," he said, using the condescending tone reserved for his employees, drawing out each word as if addressing a child, "tell us about your background. Where exactly are you from?" Zane straightened his posture, maintaining his dignity despite the hostility swirling around us. I admired how Zane maintained his composure, speaking steadily and respectfully. "My parents immigrated from Syria when I was young, sir. We've been here since I was 6. "And what do your parents do?" Dad pressed, his lips curling slightly in disdain. The harsh light from the crystal chandelier above us cast deep shadows on his face, giving him an almost sinister look. "My father works as a security guard at Atlantic Corp, and my mother cleans houses," Zane replied honestly, his voice firm and proud. "I've worked part-time jobs since I was old enough to help support them, but I was fortunate to earn a full scholarship to Preston." My mother practically choked on her wine, reaching for her water glass and gulping down mouthfuls as the pearls around her neck trembled with each swallow. Aunt Patricia and Uncle George exchanged worried glances, while Cousin Rebecca couldn't help but snicker behind her manicured hand. Dad's face flushed crimson, and I could see the vein in his forehead pulse, the one that appeared only when he was truly angry. "I hope you understand, young man," he said, pushing his plate away with such force that it rattled the expensive china, "that my Abigail is accustomed to a certain lifestyle. She's never wanted for anything. How exactly do you plan to provide for her?" Before I could jump in, Zane calmly responded, his composure a stark contrast to my father's rising fury. "I'm already successfully trading in cryptocurrency markets, Mr. Stewart. I've built a substantial portfolio, and I'm developing plans for my own tech startup." "Cryptocurrency," Dad interrupted with a harsh laugh that echoed off the mahogany paneled walls. "You mean like that scammer who took Aunt Martha for everything she had?" His voice dripped with contempt. "Dad, that's completely different," I protested, my heart racing. "Zane is incredibly knowledgeable about blockchain technology. He's even been asked to speak at tech conferences." "Enough." Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses rattle and the silverware jump. The sound made everyone at the table flinch, except Zane. "I know a con man when I see one. Your Aunt Martha thought she knew better too, didn't she, Mr. Stewart?" Zane tried to explain, still maintaining his composure as my father's face darkened. "I understand your concerns, but I assure you—" "No, you don't understand." Dad stood up, his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. He towered over the table, hands firmly planted on the white tablecloth. "You're not suitable for my daughter. You're a migrant from a poor family. You don't understand our values, our way of life. You're not one of us." I watched in horror as my father, the man who had taught me about business ethics and professionalism, revealed his true colors. The worst part was seeing the rest of my family nodding in agreement, as if he were voicing what they all thought. Dad wasn't finished. His face twisted with rage as he jabbed his finger in Zane's direction. "I see right through you. You're just another gold digger with a sob story trying to get your hands on my daughter's inheritance." "David, please," my mother interrupted, but not to defend Zane. She turned to me, her expression likely meant to be motherly. "Honey, you're too young for marriage. Finish college first. Come work at the company like we planned. There's plenty of time to think about marriage with someone more suitable." Uncle George cleared his throat. "He's probably just after the pharmacy chain, David. These people are clever that way. Remember the Martinez boy who tried dating Rebecca?" "Same thing," Aunt Patricia chimed in, discussing Zane as if he weren't even at the table. "They'll charm you until they get what they want." I glanced at Zane as my family continued their verbal assault. He sat perfectly still, his expression composed, but I noticed the slight tightening around his eyes and the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped his water glass. "What kind of future could you possibly offer her?" Dad sneered. "Living in some tiny apartment, eating microwave dinners while you waste time on your imaginary internet money." That was it. Something inside me snapped. I stood up so quickly that my chair fell backward with a crash. "Stop it. All of you, just stop." My voice shook with rage. "You should be ashamed of yourselves. You're acting like entitled, prejudiced snobs." "Abigail," Mom gasped, clutching her pearls. No, Mom, I'm done. I reached for Zane's hand. I've never been more embarrassed to be part of this family than I am right now. Come on, Zane, we're leaving? We walked toward the door with our heads held high, ignoring the muttered insults and whispered judgments behind us. His voice boomed through the foyer as we reached for our coats. You walk out that door with him, Abigail, and you'll regret it. Do you hear me? After everything we've invested in you, all the money we spent on your education, your future, you owe us. I turned back one last time, meeting his furious gaze. The only thing I owe you is the courtesy of walking out instead of telling you exactly what I think of you right now. I heard him shouting about debts and obligations as we made our way to Zane's car, but I refused to look back. Some debts, I was learning, weren't worth paying. A year flew by like a dream. Zane and I finished college. He graduated with highest honors in computer science, while I earned my business degree. We moved into a modest apartment, and despite my family's dire predictions, we were happy. So, when Zane suggested we stop waiting and get married that summer, I didn't hesitate. I spent hours crafting the perfect wedding announcement for social media, posting a beautiful engagement photo of us alongside a heartfelt message about love transcending boundaries. The responses started rolling in almost immediately, yet they weren't congratulatory. I can't believe you're still with that fortune hunter, Cousin Rebecca remarked. Your poor parents must be so disappointed. We raised you better than this, Uncle George added. My phone buzzed with notifications, each one more cruel than the last. I finally had to turn it off when my mother's comment appeared. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Don't expect us there. That night, I cried for hours while Zane held me close, whispering that we could postpone the wedding, that maybe my family just needed more time. But I was done waiting for them to change. No, I said, wiping my eyes. We're getting married with or without them. I hadn't expected James to come. He was in the middle of an important dig in Egypt, something about a previously undiscovered tomb. But 2 days before the wedding, he showed up at our apartment door, covered in desert dust and grinning. You think I'd miss my little sister's wedding? He said, pulling me into a bear hug. Besides, someone's got to walk you down the aisle. The wedding was small but beautiful, held in a garden illuminated by twinkling fairy lights strung through the trees. Zane's family filled one side of the aisle, warm and welcoming people who had embraced me as one of their own from day one. My side was painfully empty, save for James and a couple of distant cousins who had dared to defy the family boycott. As a year passed, Zane's tech career took off, and I started my own small business consultancy. We were building our life together brick by brick, without any help from the Stewart fortune. Then the invitation arrived. Your presence is requested at the 60th birthday celebration of David Stewart. My hand shook as I read it. After all this time, were they finally ready to make peace? I showed the invitation to Zane, who squeezed my hand. It's your call, love, he said softly. But whatever you decide, we'll face it together. On the night of the party, we dressed to impress. I spent hours selecting the perfect gift, a rare first edition of my father's favorite business book, something that demonstrated I still remembered and cared. As we walked into that familiar house, my heart raced with nervous anticipation. The room fell silent when we entered, just like at that first dinner, but I pushed ahead, my hands trembling as I presented the carefully wrapped package to my father. He didn't even glance at it, merely picking it up and tossing it aside like it was trash, the beautiful paper crumpling as it landed among the other gifts. The dinner began like a perfectly choreographed display of cruelty. Every question, every comment, seemed designed to wound. I watched in horror as my family took turns trying to break my husband's spirit. So, Uncle George drawled, swirling his expensive wine, still playing with your internet money, or have you found a real job yet? Before Zane could respond, Aunt Patricia chimed in. Dear, do you know which fork to use for the salad? She giggled and nudged my cousin Rebecca. These fancy dinners must be quite different from what you're used to. That's quite a simple suit you're wearing, my mother observed with a smirk. I suppose designer labels aren't in your budget. I wonder, Cousin Rebecca piped up, have you ever even eaten truffle before tonight? They're quite expensive, you know. I watched as Zane's face remained perfectly composed, even as they treated him like some sort of circus attraction. He had built a successful life from nothing, earning every bit of respect in the tech world, and yet here they were acting like he was beneath them because he hadn't inherited his success. The breaking point came when my father raised his glass. You know, he announced loudly enough to silence everyone, I always wondered what would happen to my daughter if she married beneath her station. Tell me, boy, does she miss her credit cards and shopping sprees, or have you managed to save enough from your little computer games to keep her in the lifestyle she deserves? Something snapped inside me. I stood up so fast that my chair toppled backward. How dare you? I shook with rage. You sit here in your expensive clothes in your massive house, acting like you're better than everyone else when you're nothing but small, cruel people who've never earned a single thing in your lives. The room went dead silent. You think wealth makes you worthy? Look at yourselves. You're all so busy showing off your money that you've forgotten how to be human beings. Dad's face turned purple as he stood up to match my stance. That's enough. I've had it with your ingratitude, your poor choices, your defense of this fortune hunter. He turned to face the table, raising his voice even louder. Let me make this absolutely clear. As of this moment, Abigail Stewart is no longer my daughter. She is disinherited, cut off completely. With a dramatic flourish, he gestured to my cousin Michael, who had been quietly picking at his food at the other end of the table. This is my new successor, my nephew, who understands the value of family tradition and maintaining our standards. The relatives erupted into applause as Michael stood, bowing slightly. Thank you, Uncle David. I won't let you down like some people have. I looked around the table at those people, feeling a mix of disbelief and defiance. I had once thought of them as family, my mother clapping enthusiastically for my replacement, my cousins smirking with satisfaction, and my aunts and uncles nodding in approval as they witnessed my public humiliation. Come on, Zane, I said, taking my husband's hand. We're done here. Permanently. The next few years felt like a whirlwind. Zane's initial cryptocurrency investments were just the beginning. He used that capital to launch his own tech company, developing innovative AI solutions for businesses. Within 3 years, Tech Vision Enterprises was valued at over $500 million. The same internet money my father had mocked had blossomed into a thriving empire. I beamed with pride as Zane's name began appearing in business magazines and tech journals. 30 under 30, Most Innovative CEO, Tech Visionary of the Year. The accolades kept rolling in, but what made me proudest was that success hadn't changed him. He still opened doors for others, remembered every employee's name, and continued to wear simple clothes that were now tastefully expensive instead of cheap. I longed to find my father and show him the headlines, to prove him wrong. But we hadn't spoken since that disastrous birthday dinner, and honestly, I have found peace in that silence. Then the invitation arrived. You were cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Rebecca Stewart. I stared at the thick cream envelope in disbelief. The same cousin who had mocked Zane's table manners and made snide remarks about his clothes was now inviting us to her wedding. Look what came in the mail, I said to Zane that evening, holding up the invitation. He read it carefully, then looked at me with those kind eyes I had fallen in love with years ago. Maybe we should go. In my culture, we believe family is sacred even when they hurt us. So there we were, walking into the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton for Rebecca's wedding. The reaction was unexpected. Oh my God, is that Zane Hassan, the Tech Vision CEO? Did you see his interview in Tech Weekly? I heard he just closed a deal with Microsoft. Can I get a picture with you, Mr. Hassan? The same relatives who had once looked down their noses at my immigrant husband were now eager for his attention. Former critics became eager fans, shoving business cards into his hands, asking for investment advice, and begging for photos. I watched as Zane handled it all with characteristic grace, smiling for photos, answering questions politely, making everyone feel heard and respected, even those who had never shown him the same courtesy. Your husband is absolutely brilliant, gushed Aunt Patricia, the same aunt who had mocked his table manners years ago. Did you know he was featured in Forbes? I smiled, thinking about how funny life could be. The fortune hunter they had accused him of being had built an empire bigger than anything the Stuarts had ever imagined. But unlike them, he wore his success with humility and kindness. I should have sensed something was off when my parents made a beeline for our table. Mom wore her most ingratiating smile, the one she reserved for wealthy potential investors, while Dad plastered on his best business face. Darling, Mom said, air kissing my cheeks. And Zane, we've been following your incredible success in the news. We're so proud to call you family. I couldn't help myself. Really? The same poor immigrant you couldn't bear to have at your table a few years ago. They flinched but quickly recovered. Dad cleared his throat, loosening his collar, which I noticed wasn't from his usual luxury brand. Water under the bridge, sweetheart. Family is family, right? Then came the real reason for their sudden change of heart over the wedding appetizers. The story spilled out. Michael, their precious replacement heir, had nearly destroyed Stewart Pharmaceuticals in his eagerness to cut costs. He had signed contracts with shady suppliers, and now they were facing multiple lawsuits for selling counterfeit medications. The FDA is investigating, Dad whispered, his voice dropping. The banks won't touch us. We're in trouble, princess. The legal fees alone? Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. We've had to mortgage everything. Dad reached across the table, placing his hand over Zane's. I know we got off on the wrong foot, but you're family, and family helps family, right? We just need a loan to tide us over. A few million should do it. I saw Zane's face soften with sympathy. My husband, always quick to forgive, was already reaching for his checkbook. I placed my hand over his, stopping him. Family helps family, I repeated, my voice cold. Funny how I remember you specifically saying we weren't family anymore. In fact, didn't you disown me? Abigail, Dad's voice took on that warning tone from my childhood. After everything we've done for you, he began. You taught me some valuable lessons, Dad. I cut him off. Like how not to give money to strangers, isn't that what you always said? His face turned that familiar shade of purple. You ungrateful little. And about keeping high standards, I continued, my voice carrying just as the wedding DJ asked everyone to raise their glasses to the happy couple. I'm sorry, but I don't associate with people who sell fake medications to sick people just to save a buck. Dad exploded, jumping to his feet. How dare you? After everything I've done for you, I raised you, educated you, and disowned me, I finished, stating calmly. Twice. Let's make it 3 times. You can disown me again if you'd like, but it won't change my answer. Taking Zane's hand, we walked out of the reception, my father's curses echoing behind us, just like they had years ago. But this time, I was smiling. That was 3 years ago. James keeps me updated on family news. Not that I ask. The mighty Stewart Pharmaceuticals went bankrupt. The mansion where I grew up was sold at auction. Dad and Mom downsized to a condo, selling their luxury cars and Mom's precious jewelry to pay legal fees. Sometimes I think about that dinner years ago when Dad called Zane a fortune hunter. Life has a funny way of revealing who people really are. My poor immigrant husband built an empire through hard work and integrity, while my respectable family lost everything through greed and shortcuts. But you know what I learned? Real wealth isn't about money at all. It's about having people in your life who stand by you when it matters, who lift you up instead of tearing you down. By that measure, I'm the richest woman in the world.